Hello again, whiskey friends. Hey, thanks for joining everybody. And we have a whiskey review here for you today. Today, we will be breaking down in detail the Yellowstone 2023 Special Edition. So, this is a limited edition finished in Tokai casks, which is a Hungarian white sweet wine. So we're going to break this down today. I think this is a really interesting bottle to talk about, mainly because it's one of the first limited editions that typically comes out in the year, and it is highly accessible. They make about 30,000 of these bottles and distribute about 30,000 of them, which means there's a good chance a lot of you could get your hands on this. So should you buy this one or not? Well, let's discuss it. Thanks for joining today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. All right. I'm going on brand today, and I'm using a Bourbon Junkies Glen here. So cheers, Dan. Cheers, Sean. All right. Let's pour a little sample of this out. Let it breathe as we talk about it a bit more. A little more than that. All right. So as we get into this, I said it off the top. This is the Yellowstone 2023 limited edition. Finished in Tokai casks, which is a Hungarian white wine. Comes in at 101 proof, as these have always been. And this ran retail $120 in Ohio, but I have heard that it's closer to $99, $100, $110 in other states, in other locations. So just keep that in mind. The price does vary, but I did pay $120 in Ohio, which is typically really fair being a control state and MSRP. With the Yellowstones, I've always got a good history with these Yellowstones in the sense that Yellowstone limited edition was my first finished bourbon ever. I still got a little bit of it here, but if we go back to the 2027 release, this is something that I got a long time ago. Let's see if I can get that to zoom in. There we go. And this one was finished in the white wine in charred wine casks. And that's my first finished whiskey. This is the bottle right here. Still got some of it left. Let's see how much I haven't opened this tube. Might as well do it. It's getting down there. Doesn't have too much left in it. I probably just got another year or two with this bottle, and I'll put it in sample bottles from there. If anything, I'm already letting it get too low. But a lot of good memories in this one because, heck, if you've been listening to me, I'm into finished whiskeys all the time. Now, I've gotten my hands on nearly every limited edition from Yellowstone since this 2017. Now, the one that did disappoint me was last year with the 2022 release that was finished in Marsala. I wasn't a big fan of this one. I think the 7-year cask in the blend really dominated. The finishing didn't seem to lend too much to it. It just felt somewhat like a Yellowstone. And I wasn't getting the characteristics that I expected to. Now, maybe the Marsala is, more subtle of a finish. But yeah, it just didn't hit me like an LE, especially for $120. So going into this one, I had a little trepidation. It's like, man, should I keep buying these or not? Last year's I was lukewarm on. How am I going to feel about this one? Now, it was the same price. And I will say, back in 2017, when I bought this one, it was $100. So these limited editions have been around the same price point for 6 years, which isn't something we could say about many other brands' limited editions these days. Wild turkey, cough, cough. So with this 2023 version, the other thing to go into it before I get into the tasting notes, and then we'll get into the review. This is the first bourbon I have ever had finished in Tokai casks. So I've seen that before. I've seen that word before. I've seen it floating around. I've just never come across anything actually finished in Tokai that I could get my hands on. So that was the thing that was ultimately the tiebreaker on whether I should buy this or not, was the finishing because it's so unfamiliar to me. I had to explore it, and the price of entry was $120. The other thing to keep in mind as we go through this, and I'll just read this real quick, for 2023, we offer a delicately balanced blend of 7-year, 13-year, and 16-year age bourbons. Now, they don't give you the ratio of those, but as we get into the tasting notes, I will say it does not come across as 7-year dominant as I thought last year's did. So that in itself is a positive note to start out this review. So let's get into it. Let's get into the tasting notes and let's have some fun. Thanks for joining me today, whiskey friends. Let's get into it. See, my first impression, the older casks come through initially on the nose, and I got that again today. Now, the finishing of it, which is what I imagine is lending itself to that brightness I get on the nose as well, it does come across very sweet. It might be in my mind, but there is this white grape juice that comes across, even a little bit of lemon. So when I'm talking about a brightness, I am referring to those type of fruits. Leaning in more of the age profile of this. It's new leather, tobacco, more of that type of oak profile when it comes to what's happening with these blended casks, which does make me think the 13-year or the 16-year shining through to add those type of notes. There's also this layer of powdered sugar that helps balance it. Oh man, plum, if I think more about the fruits. Ah, gosh. And even like this bit of burnt toast, essentially burnt buttered toast. Ah, burnt butter toast or a overly baked soft pretzel, maybe something in between there. If you kind of get my drift with the butter, definitely involved. I don't know. I think that's a very interesting nose, and it does intrigue me to want to dive in deeper. So let's get into the taste. Hmm. Man, really is a fruit forward bourbon, especially up front and initially. Kind of going back into dried fruits. I'd even bring up the note sugar plums up front. Ventures into even some cinnamon, maybe all the way to a clove. And there's this hint of crushed walnuts up front as well. So a lot of good initial flavors to go with its oily, creamy mouthfeel. Despite the 101 proof, this is very oily. So I do wonder how much they had to water it down, pending the proofs of those original casks. Mm. It brightens up mid palate, but man, it is a fruit bomb again. So each step of the way, we are going to be talking about a lot of fruits, and the thing that comes across mid palate for me as well, it's very, very sweet, and it's specifically old school candy store sweetness. Like I rode my bike to the candy store in the 80s, early 90s, and I bought a pack specifically of candy cigarettes. Though that's the type of sugar that I'm talking about. It's that kind of that dull sugar, but really, really good. Gosh, I don't know how else to describe it. Even the thought of probably tasting a candy cigarette as an adult is probably kind of a weird thing. I'd probably wonder why I like it so much or why I'm so nostalgic about it. Now I'm smiling thinking about it. But those are the type of flavors that I'm getting when it comes to the fruitness. Think about those type of candies that had those fruit flavors in an old school candy store. Gosh, maybe even specifically like peach wedges covered in sugar. If you think of those old school candies. They probably still sell those, right? Someone's got to still be making those. Um, I think I mentioned hint of walnut up front. Get that again mid palate as well. So the nuttiness for a Yellowstone product in particular is not aggressive. When I'm talking about a walnut, you're talking about a very subtle buttery nut versus a peanut or pecan or anything else that we could be throwing out there. Walnut, man, will I even go cashew? I think you kind of get the point. Let's go into the finish. I'm going to lean into that candy cigarette note some more. I think we could lean into that pretty successfully there. That happens again on the finish. That candy store, old school candy store sweetness keeps coming through. Dried fruit or fruit rings, somewhere between being a actual dried fruit or more of those fruit rings that you'd find at a candy store. Ooh, those older casts show up again as well on the finish. So mid palate, it did really, really brighten up, and that age really wasn't present as much as it was initially on the nose. But on the finish is where those old casts show up. Really like the balance in this particular blend with the old and the new. Get characteristics of all of them in combination with the finish. One more sip and we'll get into the scores. Yeah, just that nice oak on the finish really runs parallel to all that brightness and sweetness. Hmm. White grape juice again as well. I can see that on the finish. If I gave this to somebody blind, I think they'd know it's finished. Well, let's get into the scores. So here on the site, we do have a 3-tier scoring system. We have a flavor score, experience score, and a value score. Each one has a whole bunch of metrics behind the scenes, but ultimately it's all about how delicious was it, how complex or how was that mouth feel when it comes to the experience, and ultimately how happy am I for the price that was paid. Mine retail in Ohio is $120. Usually when we fill out our form, there's some sway in the scores, right? Like it goes up and down. Some things get a 7, some things get a 9, some things get a 6. There's some variance going on in the scores. Not on this one. I straight lined the heck out of this thing. I gave every single metric an 8. Just a solid 8 all the way through the entire experience. I enjoyed it each step of the way. The complexity didn't completely blow me away in any over top way to get a 9, but it's really good. It's good. It's got good balance and even the value. I mean, I'd prefer to pay the 100 than the 120 that Ohio's saying, but yeah, that's fine for what it is. So yeah, ends up at a straight 80. Haven't really done any straight 80s like this before. So there's the first. I do think the cool thing is as well, once again, relatively speaking, they are keeping the prices down and making 30,000 of these available. It is an accessible limited edition. So just go into it kind of knowing that it's just a very crushable limited edition. The recommend, I did give it a 7 out of 10. The finishing on this one with those Tokai barrels, man, I don't know if people would just think it's funky or not. With those white grape juice notes, just kind of this roller coaster ride between the different ages of the casts and the finishing and how fruit forward it is. I think it's delicious, but I could maybe see other people not digging this finishing. I don't know. I'm really interested to give this one to people blind and to get their raw sense of it sometime in the future, just like I did with the Marsala over the course of the year. Do I plan to buy another? Technically, I've never backed up one of these Yellowstones. They have just been good to explore every year and then move on to the next year. So this one hasn't enticed me enough where I would seek a backup bottle. But unlike the Marsala next year, I'm back in the game. I'll probably buy the 2024 sight unseen even. This one intrigued me with the Tokai casts, brought me back in, I think I can go into next year confidently spending that amount if they keep the prices in this $100 to $120 range. So that breaks down the Yellowstone 2023 limited edition. Let me know in the comments if you have tried this, if you've seen it around, and what are your thoughts on this particular pour. Well, thank you for joining me today for the review, everybody. We'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye, whiskey friends.
Jeff, just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you say hello again. Oh, Jeffrey, you should just be friends with me. But you have these whiskey friends, and you